2. Alistair McRae wheeled Mr. Webb into autopsy room 3. A tray of surgical implements waited patiently while Alistair struggled with the gurney. The wheels wanted to turn in any direction that didn't position the tray next to Mr. Webb's body. After fighting with it for several minutes, Alistair gave up and rolled the surgical tray to Mr. Webb. Alistair tugged at the plain white shroud covering the man and donned surgical gloves as he visually inspected the body. He felt around the ankles, wrists, and neck. He examined the dead man's fingers, one at a time, evaluating the tips. He pulled the lips back and studied the teeth, prying open the jaw and studying the tongue and the roof of the man's mouth. He bent the ears back and observed the thinly veiled skull behind them. Nodding, he pried open Mr. Webb's eyelids. He noted every blemish and scar, learning from the dead man what the dead man couldn't have told Alistair in life. 15 minutes later, Alistair limped over to a desk near the examination table and selected a pen from several sitting there. After scribbling in a notebook, he hobbled back to Mr. Webb and rummaged through instruments on the surgical tray before settling on a number 10 scalpel. He covered his mouth and swallowed several times, forcing bile down as he hovered over the cadaver. A lamp angled over the upper torso of the body muted the dim glow of overhead lights. Even the sheen of its luminescence glancing off pale, dead skin challenged the contents of his stomach. Alistair had been standing a good 2 feet away from Mr. Webb, giving him wide berth while he attempted to tame his own body. Far away, in the bowels of St. George's Hospital, a steady knocking commenced and echoed throughout passages devoid of human life. The boiler did that. It would knock with a rhythmic tuck, 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 always 3 at a time, followed by a brief pause, as if considering its position on the matter before recommencing. The noise bounced off walls and down the hallways, as if searching for something. Concrete walls became a tuning fork, carrying the sound like a curse uttered on the wind. His gut quelled, Alistair stepped toward the body of Mr. Webb, a bloated corpse that resembled a human. Facial features distorted to caricature, and a distended belly jiggled with water and gas. Alistair imagined sensing the stench that would emanate from the body when he sliced into it. He had smelled it countless times before, but each time was like the first. The toxic waters of the Thames, intermingled with the body's own collection of gases, combined to form a noxious combination that could only be recognised as death. Placing the tip of the scalpel on the top of the sternum, he sensed pressure as the skin, still elastic enough that it had some give, gave way but did not break. A surge of nausea invaded his upper body again. It tingled inside and shocked him, and saliva became a scarce commodity. His lips sandpaper, he ran his tongue along the roof of his mouth, a mouth clenched as he struggled to swallow. A little more pressure now, he reminded himself. He had done it so many times before, he didn't need to instruct himself. Except his mind was awash with things that refused to permit learned things in. A little more, he thought again. All he had to do was apply pressure, and when the razor of the scalpel cut deep into the skin and flesh beneath it, this man's chest would part ways like the Red Sea, and unfold like the invisible glue keeping flesh and blood in place. He swallowed once more, clenching the handle of the scalpel in a manner never taught to him at Cambridge, and prepared to open the man's chest. "Alistair! Oh, what is that stench?" Alistair started, and the motion of his hand, which had been bearing down on Mr. Webb's chest, caused the tip of the scalpel to dig into the flesh. A 1-centimetre incision appeared as red can be, and a small amount of viscous blood seeped out and trickled down the edge of the knife. He removed the scalpel and looked up at Timothy Payne, who held a forearm to his face while he fished in his pockets for a handkerchief. "That stench," Alistair replied. is the result of a dead body being doused in the river for a day or more. Payne frowned and placed a handkerchief over his nose. Are you finished with Mr. Webb yet? Alistair shook his head. I just finished the visual examination and was about to cut into him. For what purpose? Alistair frowned. To understand how the man died, he said, his tone of voice suggesting that he stated the obvious. Payne glanced at the naked body lying on a slab. What might you possibly deduce from that would lead you to believe the poor soul died from anything other than a healthy dose of the Thames? His queasiness temporarily abated by his proclivity for mysteries, Alistair placed the scalpel on an instrument tray and beckoned to Payne. Without waiting for him to respond, Alistair gestured toward the dead man's ankles. Look here, he said. He drew an imaginary line with his index finger at a circular pattern of flesh around the ankles just above the tops of the feet. Look here, he said again. Do you see? Payne, who had approached the table when Alistair beckoned him, took his spectacles, which always sat on his balding head when he wasn't wearing them, and placed them on his face so they hung low on the bridge of his hawk-like nose. He leaned in and peered at the area in question for a moment, then stood upright and shrugged. The fish having a snack? He queried, although he already knew the answer. The Thames was so polluted that it was all but devoid of life. Alistair shook his head and moved to the man's skull, placing both palms behind the head and lifting gingerly. Now look at this, Alistair said excitedly. As Payne leaned over, Alistair lifted a bit more, and the man's neck, stiff from rigor mortis, creaked. Alistair felt around Mr. Webb's skull, using his fingertips to part thick black hair matted from prolonged soaking. His hands predisposed, he gestured with his head. Do you see those lesions? No, right there, at the base of the cranium. Payne glanced at the spot Alistair pointed out, before standing upright, frustration visible on his face. Really, Alistair, he said. Not every body we receive here is an Agatha Christie novel, you know. Thankfully, Alistair snorted as he prodded around the marks with a gloved forefinger. Life would be boring if every corpse was so easily ascribed to stabbing or poisoning. But you saw the marks. They have the characteristic bruising associated with sudden trauma. After pondering his words for a moment, he added, Not accidentally, either. Not this Lothard business again. Locard. Dr. Edmund Locard. Alistair didn't wait for Payne to make another ignorant statement. Dr. Locard, he said evenly, is a pioneer in the field of medical investigation. His work is changing the way we investigate cause of death. Payne snorted, and with that, Alistair returned to pondering the corpse lying on his table. He seemed to forget Payne was even there. In Alistair's mind, he was somewhere else, a vast, empty wilderness, where there were no words and people like Timothy Payne didn't exist. Nails, Payne said. He hit his head against nails. Alistair resented the interruption, but did not display his resentment. He lowered Mr. Payne's head. Two of them that close together? He shook his head. That wouldn't account for the charring around the lesions. No, he said, and rubbed his chin. I'd surmise a goad. Goad? An electric livestock prod. It would account for the charring and necrosis around the lesions. The spacing seems right, and those ligature marks on his ankles suggest he was bound. But none on his wrists. Payne jumped at the opportunity to refute Alistair, pointing at the dead man's arms. He stuck his chest out as if he were Phidippides arriving at Athens. If he was tied up, how do you explain that? Alistair shrugged off Payne's hasty dismissal. He was hung upside down, he responded, by his ankles. There was no need to tie his hands. Alistair hobbled away from Payne and over to the nearby table as he fumbled for a pen in his breast pocket. It was only when he realised there was none there that he looked at the table. On it sat 3 pens, and he wondered if he had known that they were there. He chose one and made a few notes before replacing the pen and rubbing his chin again. Payne watched his back and was about to say something when Alistair spun round and pointed accusingly at the body of the late Mr. Webb. Sherlock Holmes had forgone his dressing gown for a lab coat. This man was killed deliberately. Satisfied with himself, Alistair lowered his arm and grinned at Payne, who couldn't contain his irritation. "I don't pay you to be Edmund Lockhart." Payne, still holding a handkerchief to his face, cried and flailed a free arm. "Or Sherlock Holmes?" Alistair nodded. "Indeed you don't." In fact, he didn't pay Alistair at all. The National Health Service paid his meagre salary, and Alistair often wondered why Payne treated the British Crown's money as if it were his own. "I admire your vivid imagination," Payne continued. "But if it is as you say, how did seasoned coppers miss what you believe to be true? Honestly, Alistair, you think too highly of yourself." Alistair ignored the slight. He had expected Payne's question and wasted no time choosing a calm response. "Because the coppers believe the same thing you do," he said, "that the ankle damage is the result of a body spending an excessive amount of time in fetid water. And those lesions at the base of Mr. Webb's skull were obfuscated by matted hair. They're small enough that they're easy to miss if one isn't paying attention. They only became evident upon closer inspection. Perhaps the seasoned coppers were just lazy coppers."
"A livestock prod doesn't kill a man," Payne retorted.
"Certainly not one of his," he grimaced with distaste. "Girth." "The goad didn't kill him. It was used to incapacitate him, or perhaps as a form of torture before he went in the water." "No." Alistair placed his hands together and intertwined the fingers. "Mr. Webb almost certainly drowned. I won't know for certain until I open him up." The mere idea of cutting him open caused Alistair to belch, and he raised a fist to his mouth, excusing himself before continuing. "Look at the pinkish foam around the mouth and nostrils." Alistair gestured with a gloved hand, but Payne didn't seem to notice or care. "He aspirated water. He drowned all right. But I'm convinced he had help. Perhaps he was hung upside down and doused in the river. It would be an effective method of getting one's message across, assuming one had a message to get across. There's hospital business to attend to as well, you know." It wasn't lost on Alistair that Timothy Payne referred to the affairs of the hospital as those of a business, rather than a place where patients received treatment. Payne wasn't a man of medicine. He was a bureaucrat, a pencil pusher, and a bean counter, and he was very good at it. Every case that came through the mortuary processed, every body ticked off and shipped off. He didn't care what had happened to them before they arrived, nor did he care what happened to them after they left. The quicker, the better, in his estimation. And he did not like complications. Payne was correct in pointing out that the mortuary's primary purpose was to serve the hospital and the patients that passed away under its roof. But it was also true that cadavers arrived regularly, whether suspicious or not. Most murders were flagged as murders before the corpses arrived at his door. It was the mortuary's job, Payne felt, to rubber stamp preconceptions provided by police and move on to the next one. He managed a group of pathologists, not detectives. It was the order of things, and he remained content as long as his charges maintained and respected that order. But when his pathologists strode outside the comfort zone he had laboured to establish, things became messy. There were enough suspicious deaths without people like Alistair turning open and shut cases into murder mysteries. Suspicious deaths meant more paperwork and additional coordination with law enforcement. Interviews with detectives, Payne's people testifying in court even. Wasted time that might have been spent processing cadavers quickly and efficiently. "Fine," Payne grumbled. "Put Mr. Webb back in the cooler. We can deal with him later. A more urgent matter requires our attention." He removed his spectacles and massaged the bridge of his nose. The knocking of the boiler echoed through the room, and the dim hum of fluorescent lights provided harmony. "More urgent," Alistair said. Payne's chest expanded like a mourning dove preparing to sing. "Our presence has been requested at the Home Office." "Requested?" Alistair's face dropped, and the uncomfortable sensation in his gut returned. "Demanded, then," Payne muttered, as he turned and walked away. "We leave in 15 minutes.